It was January 2015. The kind of cold that seeps into your bones blanketed Houston, Texas. George Pickering sat in his pickup truck, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. He'd just come from the hospital. Again. And once again, he'd been told the same thing. Your son is gone. His 27-year-old boy, George Pickering III, had suffered a massive stroke. The diagnosis was clear. The machines were breathing for him. The monitors beeped for him. The doctors said there was no brain activity, no chance, no future. But George couldn't accept that. He wouldn't. This wasn't just a son. This was his best friend, his legacy, his world. And while the hospital was preparing to take his son off life support, George was preparing something else. He didn't sleep that night. He paced, drank coffee, cried in silence. And then he made a decision most people would never understand. He went back to the hospital, but this time, with a gun. It was an act of desperation. A man pushed beyond the brink. He stormed into Tomball Regional Medical Center with a firearm hidden beneath his coat. He didn't aim it at anyone. He didn't threaten the nurses. He just went straight to his son's room and sat beside him. With tears running down his face, he told the staff, "No one touches that machine. Not until I say so." The hospital went into lockdown. Negotiators were called. George's ex-wife and older son tried to reason with him from the hallway. But nothing mattered to George in that moment, except the boy lying in that bed. Hours passed, and then something happened. George reached out, took his son's hand and whispered, "Son, if you can hear me, squeeze." And then the fingers moved, a faint, unmistakable squeeze. George froze. The doctors rushed in, instruments flying, eyes wide. They confirmed it. George Pickering III was responding. Not just reflexes, not involuntary spasms. Real, cognitive response. He was alive. The story spread like wildfire. A father's love, a miracle recovery, a standoff that turned into salvation. But the media didn't show the full story. They didn't know everything that led up to that day. George Pickering Sr. wasn't just a father. He was a flawed man, a man with demons. In the years prior, he'd battled alcoholism. It strained his marriage, hurt his family, left scars that couldn't be seen. But he loved his sons. And when George III collapsed from a sudden stroke, it shattered him. The hospital declared him brain dead based on early signs. But George Sr. felt something in his gut, a voice that said, "They're wrong." He tried to get second opinions. He begged the doctors to wait. But his ex-wife had legal authority. She'd agreed to end life support. George had no legal say, just love. And so, in his pain and fury and brokenness, he grabbed a gun and held the hospital hostage, not to hurt, but to buy time, to give his son one more chance. After the incident, George was arrested, charged with aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. He faced years behind bars, but something extraordinary happened. His son, who had since regained consciousness and begun recovering, spoke on his behalf. "He saved my life. He did what any father would do if he knew his son was still in there." The judge listened and showed mercy. George Sr. served a reduced sentence, and when he got out, he didn't hide. He spoke publicly about trauma, about faith, about how sometimes the world sees a criminal when all it takes is a father refusing to let go. George Pickering III went on to fully recover. He returned to work, rebuilt his life. Father and son became advocates for second chances, in hospitals, in the justice system, in families. Their bond, once tested by crisis, became a symbol of something deeper: resilience, love, and the power of believing in someone when no one else does. Because sometimes it takes a broken man to see the truth. Sometimes you have to hold on, even when everyone tells you to let go. And sometimes a single squeeze of a hand can change everything. But their story didn't end there. After the media attention faded, George Sr. and George III continued to speak out, especially about end-of-life decisions in hospitals. They were invited to medical conferences. George Sr. spoke to rooms filled with doctors, nurses, and ethicists about how fragile the line between protocol and humanity can be. He wasn't bitter, but he was honest. "There's a difference," he said, "between giving up and letting go too soon." His speech at the National Hospital Ethics Forum in 2017 was shared across the country. He began working with advocacy groups to push for more time in evaluating patients with brain injuries. He wasn't against science. He was for caution, for patience, for hope. Meanwhile, George III started working with patients in recovery programs. He helped others with neurological trauma, sharing his experience of being trapped inside his body, aware but unable to respond. He remembered hearing the sounds, the beeping, the sobs, and, most of all, his father's voice. That voice became his anchor in the darkness. They started a non-profit together, Hold On Hope. Its mission was simple: support families facing critical hospital decisions, offer them time, legal advice, counseling, and a network of others who'd been there. In one case, a mother in Ohio reached out. Her daughter had fallen into a coma after an accident. The doctors said she was gone, but the mother saw signs, just like George had. With the foundation's help, she delayed the termination order. 2 weeks later, her daughter opened her eyes. One family after another began to share similar stories. The Pickering story became more than a headline. It became a lifeline. George Sr. passed away in 2022, peacefully, at home, surrounded by his family. At his funeral, George III gave the eulogy. He didn't talk about the gun or the hospital standoff. He talked about the man who looked into a room full of machines and still saw his son. "He didn't save me with a weapon," he said. "He saved me with love." If you're watching this right now and you're on the edge of giving up, don't. If you've been told it's over, maybe it isn't. And if there's still a voice inside you whispering to hold on, listen to it. Because sometimes one act of faith can turn into a miracle. And sometimes what the world calls crazy is just the kind of love that refuses to die. If this story moved you, subscribe to Resilient Stories. Because behind every headline, there's a heartbeat. And behind every miracle, there's someone who refused to give up. Your next story starts here.